Stop. Before you pick up that eyeliner this morning, look closely at your eyes in the mirror. Not a quick glance while you brush your teeth. A real look. Do they look tired even on the mornings you slept 9 full hours? Do they look smaller than they used to, no matter how carefully you apply your makeup or how much concealer you use underneath? There is a very specific eye makeup habit that almost every woman over 60 still does purely out of habit, something she has done the exact same way for 20 or 30 years without ever questioning it. And it is quietly adding 10 years to her face every single morning before she even leaves the bathroom. Today, I am counting down the 5 biggest eye makeup mistakes I see again and again in women over 60. Mistakes I have watched women make in my chair for years, and every single one of them is completely fixable without a single expensive product or a dramatic new routine. I am saving the mistake that changes everything, the one almost nobody talks about because it happens before a single product is even applied, for the very end of this video. Do not skip ahead, because these 5 fixes build on each other, and once you correct all 5 in order, the difference staring back at you in the mirror is honestly startling. Women who have sat in my chair have told me they finally recognize themselves again after we walked through exactly what I am about to show you. Welcome back to Stylish 60 Plus, the channel where we talk honestly about what actually works for our faces at this stage of life instead of recycled advice built for a much younger woman's eyelid. Let's start with mistake number 1, because it is the one I see more than any other single mistake on this entire list. And it is usually the very first thing a woman learned to do with eye makeup decades ago, which is exactly why it is so hard to let go of. Thick, dark eyeliner drawn all the way around the entire eye, top and bottom, in one solid, unbroken line. It feels dramatic. It feels finished. It feels like the eye is not truly done until that full ring is complete. And for years, this technique probably worked beautifully, framing the eye and making it look larger and more awake. But here is what almost nobody explains to you at the makeup counter or in a magazine tutorial. As the eyelid naturally softens with age and the eye itself becomes slightly smaller, slightly more hooded, and a little less lifted than it once was, a full solid ring of dark liner stops defining the eye and instead starts to shrink it. The dark line at the top meets the natural shadow already forming in the crease, and the dark line at the bottom meets the natural softness already forming under the eye, and instead of opening the whole area up, the 2 lines squeeze in on the eye from every direction at once, making it look smaller, more closed, and considerably more tired than the woman wearing it actually feels. I want to tell you about a client of mine named Diane, because her story is exactly why I make videos like this one. Diane came into my chair a few months ago wearing the same full black winged liner she had worn since she was in her 30s, and she told me, almost apologetically, that people kept telling her she looked exhausted, even on days she felt completely rested and happy. We did nothing dramatic that day. We simply broke the ring. And by the time she looked in the mirror again, she actually gasped, because her eyes looked brighter and more open than they had in years, using the exact same eyeliner she already owned. Here is the fix, and I want you to actually try this tomorrow morning before you do anything else with your makeup. Line only the upper lash line, staying as close to the roots of the lashes as physically possible, and instead of a thick solid line the whole way across, taper it so it is thinnest at the inner corner near the bridge of your nose and only builds in thickness gradually as it moves toward the outer corner. On the lower lash line, either skip liner completely, which is genuinely the better choice for most women over 60, or if you feel your eye needs a little grounding underneath, use only a soft smudged taupe or warm brown pencil along the outer third of the lower lash line, never along the inner corner, and never in black. Black along the lower lash line after 60 is one of the single fastest ways to make an eye look smaller and more tired, even when every other part of the makeup application is completely flawless. There is one more small detail almost nobody mentions, and it makes a real difference. Skip lining the waterline entirely, the thin strip of skin just inside your lash line. This area tends to become slightly more sensitive and slightly less defined with age, and a dark liner here does the same shrinking effect as the full ring we just talked about, except right up against the eyeball itself, which can also make the eye look watery or irritated by midday. If you want a touch of brightness here instead, a soft nude or light pink pencil, along the inner waterline can actually make the white of the eye look brighter and the whole eye look considerably more awake, which is the exact opposite effect of the dark liner it replaces. This one change alone, breaking the full ring, softening the lower lash line, and skipping the dark waterline liner, opens the entire eye area in a way that reads as instantly more awake, more youthful, and more approachable without changing a single other product in your routine. I also want to mention the actual tool you reach for because it matters more than most women think. A very soft, slightly blunted pencil or a fine felt tip liner glides far more gently across softened, thinner eyelid skin than a stiff liquid liner with a sharp, precise tip. Liquid liner can be beautiful, but it demands a completely steady hand and skin that holds a crisp line without smudging or settling into fine lines within the hour, which becomes harder to guarantee as the skin around the eye naturally changes. A soft pencil, warmed slightly between your fingers before application, gives you far more forgiveness and a softer, more flattering result with almost no extra effort. But this next mistake happens in a spot on your eyelid you genuinely cannot see well without leaning very close to a mirror, which is exactly why almost nobody catches it themselves. Section 2. Mistake T-do-o, eyeshadow placement. Here is the mistake almost nobody notices they are making, because it happens in a spot you genuinely cannot see well on yourself without leaning very close to the mirror and pulling your eyelid taut with your fingers, which most of us never actually do in our normal morning routine. Sweeping dark, matte eyeshadow deep into the crease and blending it heavily upward. The exact technique that created beautiful, sculpted definition when you were 40 now quietly works against you after 60. Here is why. As the eyelid naturally softens and the crease itself shifts slightly lower or becomes partially hidden when the eyes are fully open, that same dark, matte shadow no longer sits in the crease the way it once did. It sits on top of the small fold of skin that has developed with age, and instead of reading as sculpted definition, it reads as a shadow of hooding, making the eye look heavier, sleepier, and more closed even when the rest of the makeup application is completely flawless. I have seen this happen to women who spent 20 minutes perfecting a beautiful smoky eye, only to have it read as tired rather than glamorous the moment they stepped into daylight. And it was never about their skill with a brush. It was about where that darkest shade landed on a lid shape that had quietly changed. The fix is shifting your darkest shade slightly higher and considerably softer, and introducing a light, warm shimmer directly onto the center of the lid and just underneath the brow bone instead. Here is the actual science behind why this works so well. Shimmer and light reflecting tones bounce light forward toward the viewer, which visually lifts the eyelid and makes it appear to come toward you, while matte, dark tones absorb light and visually recede backward. By placing a soft champagne, warm ivory, or pale gold shimmer at the very center of the lid, you are essentially building a built-in highlight exactly where the eye needs the most lift, and you should only use your deeper transition shade in a soft, diffuse sweep just above the natural crease, blended upward and outward, never pressed downward into the fold itself. One more detail that changes absolutely everything about how this looks by the middle of the day. Skip fully matte finishes entirely across hooded or softened lids. A satin or soft shimmer finish worn across the whole lid looks more youthful in every single kind of lighting you will encounter throughout your day, from a bright kitchen in the morning to a dim restaurant in the evening, because it keeps catching tiny points of light continuously, instead of going completely flat and lifeless by noon the way a heavy matte finish tends to do on mature skin. Let's also talk briefly about color choice, because this matters more than most women realize. If your eyes are blue or green, a warm champagne or soft rose gold shimmer on the lid, paired with a plum or deep brown transition shade rather than gray or black, will make your eye color noticeably more vivid, because warm tones sit opposite cool eye colors on the color wheel and create natural contrast. If your eyes are brown, a soft copper or bronze shimmer intensifies the warmth of your natural eye color beautifully, while a deep aubergine transition shade adds a subtle richness without ever looking heavy. None of these choices require an expensive new palette. Most women already own at least one of these shades sitting unused in a drawer somewhere, simply because nobody ever explained where to actually place it. Section 3. Mistake 3. Mascara and lacious. Mistake number 3 lives right at the very end of your routine, and it is the one that can quietly undo every careful step you just took with liner and shadow. Several thick coats of mascara applied straight down onto lashes that have naturally thinned, become sparser, and grown a little more brittle over the years. It feels like more coverage automatically means more definition, the same logic that made sense decades ago. But on finer, more fragile, more sparse lashes, heavy buildup does the exact opposite of what you actually want. The weight drags each lash downward instead of lifting it. It clumps unevenly between lashes that already have more space between them, and it can genuinely make the eye look smaller by physically pulling the outer corner of the lash line down along with it. I think about a client named Carol every time I talk about this one, because her transformation was so simple it almost felt unfair. Carol had been applying 4 to 5 coats of the same drugstore mascara every single morning for years, convinced that more product was the only way to compensate for lashes that had thinned. When we switched her to 2 light coats using a completely different technique, she told me her eyes looked wider within seconds, and she has not gone back to her old routine since. The fix is a lighter hand and an entirely different technique than most of us were ever taught. Wiggle the wand gently at the very base of the lashes first, right where they emerge from the lid, to deposit product exactly where it is needed most. Then sweep upward and slightly outward in one smooth motion rather than pressing straight down and dragging back up repeatedly, which is precisely what creates the clumping we are trying to avoid. 1 to 2 coats maximum is almost always enough on lashes that have thinned with age. If you want more visible definition without adding more weight, reach for a lash curler used before mascara, held gently at the base for just 5 to 10 seconds. This single tool lifts the entire lash line instantly and does far more visual work in that short amount of time than a third or fourth heavy coat of mascara ever could. And here is a detail almost nobody mentions in a typical beauty tutorial. As lashes naturally thin with age, especially along the outer corners where sparseness tends to show first, adding just 2 or 3 individual false lashes to only the outer third of each eye, rather than a full dramatic strip lash, opens and lifts the entire eye shape in a way that looks completely natural, because you are simply reinforcing your own existing lash line exactly where it needs the most support, rather than covering it up with something obviously artificial. If your lashes have thinned considerably, it is also worth considering a nightly lash serum applied along the base of the upper lash line, similar in concept to how you might treat thinning hair at the roots. Results take patience, usually 6 to 8 weeks of consistent nightly use before you notice a real difference, but many women find their natural lash density genuinely improves over time, which means less reliance on heavy mascara or false lashes altogether as the months go on. One final tip on this topic that changes how everything else on your face reads together. If you wear glasses, especially for reading or daily wear, curling your lashes matters even more than it does for women who do not, because the lens itself can visually compress the eye area and make already thin lashes even less noticeable from a distance. A well-curled, lightly coated lash holds its lift and visibility even from behind a lens, keeping your eyes looking bright and awake throughout the entire day. SCTON 4. Mistake 4. Eyebrow shape and color. Mistake number 4 sits just above the eye itself, and it changes the entire framing of your whole face far more than most women ever realize while they are doing it. A brow drawn in one harsh, uniformly dark, perfectly straight line from end to end. This was a genuinely popular look for years, and on certain faces it can still look striking, but on a face where the natural brow has thinned, lightened, or become patchier with age, a solid, overly dark, flat line reads as artificial rather than defined, and it creates a hard horizontal shape that fights directly against the gentle arch a mature face actually needs for real balance and lift. Here is why this matters so much more than people expect. Your eyebrows function as the frame around your entire eye area, the same way the frame around a painting shapes how you perceive everything inside it. A brow that is too dark, too flat, or too heavily drawn pulls attention downward and creates a shadow effect over the eye beneath it, undoing much of the lifting work we just talked about with your eyeshadow and mascara. A brow that is softly shaped, appropriately colored, and gently arched does the opposite. It lifts the entire eye area beneath it and creates the illusion of more space and more openness across the whole upper face. The fix is a soft, feathered brow that is 1 to 2 shades lighter than you probably think you need, applied with short, hair-like strokes rather than one solid block of color, and shaped with a gentle, natural arch rather than a flat, straight line. Here's why the shade specifically matters so much. As we age, our natural hair color, including the hair in our eyebrows, typically lightens, grays, or softens in tone. A brow pencil in the same deep, rich brown you reached for in your 30s now sits, considerably darker than your current natural coloring, creating a stark, unnatural contrast the very moment anyone looks closely, even in a casual conversation. Matching your brow color to a shade slightly lighter than your natural hair color, using tiny, individual hair-like strokes concentrated more heavily near the front of the brow and tapering to almost nothing by the very tail end, gives you real definition without ever looking drawn on or artificial. The arch itself matters every bit as much as the color. A soft, slightly lifted arch positioned about 2/3 of the way along the length of the brow, rather than a flat, straight line running the entire length, instantly lifts the whole eye area beneath it, working almost like a very subtle, completely natural brow lift without a single needle, filler, or procedure involved. I want to mention one more option that many women over 60 have never considered simply because nobody ever brought it up to them. Brow lamination, a gentle professional treatment that brushes and sets brow hairs upward and into place for several weeks at a time. For thinner or more unruly brows, this single treatment can make brows appear noticeably fuller and better shaped every single day, without any daily pencil work at all beyond a very light fill in any sparse areas. It typically lasts around 6 weeks and is considerably gentler than more invasive treatments, making it an easy, low commitment option worth asking about at your next salon visit. And finally, a small detail on tools rather than technique. If you are still using a thick blunt pencil to fill in your brows, consider switching to a fine tip pencil or a tiny angled brush paired with a brow powder instead. The thinness of the tip is what actually allows those short hair-like strokes we talked about, and a thick blunt pencil almost always defaults back into the same solid block of color we are specifically trying to move away from, no matter how careful you try to be with it. SETN 5. Fee payoff, mistake 5, and close. We have covered 4 mistakes so far: the ring of dark liner, the deep matte crease, the heavy mascara, and the harsh flat brow. But mistake number 5 is the one I promised you at the very beginning of this video, and it is different from every mistake we have already discussed because it happens before you apply a single product. Skipping the right base entirely, using the same heavy, dry concealer under the eyes and directly on the lid that you have relied on for years, without ever adjusting the technique for how skin texture genuinely changes over time. Here is the backwards reveal I promised you, the one that surprises almost every woman the first time she hears it. More concealer does not mean more coverage as skin ages, and in most cases, it means considerably less. As the skin underneath the eyes and across the eyelid naturally becomes thinner and slightly more textured with age, a thick, dry concealer applied heavily does not smooth anything at all. It sinks directly into every fine line within an hour of application and makes those lines look noticeably deeper and more visible than if you had used a much thinner layer in the first place, or skipped heavy coverage entirely in favor of a lighter, more hydrating approach. The exact same principle applies to the eyelid itself. Skipping a light, hydrating eye primer and applying eyeshadow directly onto bare, slightly dry skin causes that shadow to crease and settle into the natural fold within just a few hours, no matter how carefully and beautifully it was blended that morning. I think of a client named Ruth whenever I explain this one, because she had spent years convinced that a heavier hand with concealer was simply part of getting older, an unavoidable trade-off she had quietly accepted. When we switched her to a thin, buildable layer with proper hydration underneath, she told me her under eye area looked smoother by the middle of the day than it had in years, using considerably less product than she had ever applied before. The fix is genuinely the simplest one on this entire list, and it is exactly why I saved it for last. A small amount of hydrating, lightweight eye primer smoothed onto the lid before any shadow goes on, and a thin, buildable layer of a creamy, brightening concealer under the eye, set with only the smallest amount of translucent powder pressed gently on with a puff rather than swept on heavily with a brush, which can push powder into fine lines rather than simply setting the concealer in place. This single change makes every other fix we discussed today last for hours instead of fading and creasing by lunchtime, and it is the real reason a full face of otherwise perfect eye makeup can still look tired by early afternoon if this one foundational step gets skipped. There is one more detail worth mentioning here because it ties directly into color correcting rather than simply concealing. If the skin under your eyes leans slightly blue or purple, a very small amount of a peach or salmon-toned corrector underneath your regular concealer neutralizes that tone far more effectively than piling on additional layers of concealer alone ever could. If the area leans more brown or sallow, a soft lavender tone corrector does the same neutralizing work in the opposite direction. Applied in the thinnest possible layer, blended gently with a fingertip rather than a brush, which uses your own body heat to melt the product seamlessly into the skin. This single step can eliminate the need for heavy concealer altogether. If I had to recommend just one habit to change out of everything we covered today, it would be this one, because it is the foundation every other fix on this list actually depends on. You can perfect your liner, your shadow placement, your mascara technique, and your brow shape, and all of it can still unravel by early afternoon if the base underneath was never properly prepared to hold it. Every single mistake we talked about today comes from the exact same root cause. Applying the same techniques your eyes needed 20 or 30 years ago onto eyes that have naturally, gradually, and beautifully changed since then. None of these 5 fixes require expensive new products or a completely different morning routine. They simply require working with your eyes as they actually are today, rather than as they used to be, and giving yourself permission to update a habit that has quietly outlived its usefulness. So tell me, out of everything we covered today, which of these 5 mistakes do you think you have been making all along without realizing it? And which single fix are you trying first thing tomorrow morning? I read every single comment, and I would genuinely love to know which one surprised you the most.